Hello and welcome to the video. This is a quick video about the results of a little bit of questioning that I did to you, my viewers. Now, I regularly get asked by people, what should I buy if I want to start out in FPV? Now, these days, going for top-of-the-line analog FPV equipment is going to cost about the same as starting out with digital HD. So, although it might appear quite expensive, there's not a lot of difference between getting your Fat Sharks and your Rapid Fire and your high-end cameras and VTXs as going and investing in something like Walk Snail, HD0, or even something like DJI. However, back in the day, there was an option to start cheap and cheerful, kind of sub £100. You could get a £20 camera, a £20 VTX, and you could get a £60 set of box goggles, things like this thing from Hobby King back in the day, but also things like the Quantum Cyclops were fantastic products. These days, if I can ask that question, I honestly don't know what I should be recommending. So thank you to every single one of you that actually spent the time and replied to those 3 questions. I put these in the community section here on the YouTube channel to find out which are the best options for new pilots to buy goggles, cameras and VTXs, specifically with an eye on the price point. So I'll put timecodes down below if you're interested in going having a look at that. Nicely, lots of products were getting the same kind of ticks and upvotes, so there are some really good options if you still want to start out with analog. Be aware though that quality can suffer the cheaper that you go, so it can be a false economy, and it can get to a point, particularly in the goggle side, where if you get too cheap then they're not comfortable, they don't work very well, you can't focus on them, the reception's terrible, and it kind of puts you off the whole idea. So historically, where there was those kind of cheap Quantum Cyclops stuff, there wasn't any great suggestions for that. So let's look at what pilots chose, and we'll start with the most expensive stuff first. Now, these are the results in a table format. I've ordered them so the ones that got the highest votes are at the top, and I've just had a quick look on the internet for what the indicative prices were so that you can get an idea of what they look like. Rather than spend some time looking at this particular thing because it's a bit trickier to see, I thought I'd stick it in a little graphic. This is the results of the goggles suggested, and you can see here that by far the most popular one that was suggested for goggles for new pilots were the EV300Ds and the EV300Ms from Eachine. Now, Eachine do make quite a lot of pretty decent stuff for analog now. The thing is though, that's a £320 goggle. If you look across to see when the money drops below £100, you're starting to get into things like the EV100s. A lot of goggles come these days as part of these all-in-one kits where you get a drone, a goggle and a little radio as well. Those goggles tend to be a little bit rough and ready, but as a way to try FPV, things like the EV100 will work, but I think you would rapidly outgrow something like that. So again, you have to be a little bit careful, because although you could get into it for £100, after 3 or 4 months, that investment is pretty much just bin fodder, and you'd end up going for something else, potentially a HD system. Another thing that's really interesting is that quite a lot of the recommendations was to go and buy some second-hand kit, and I think that's a really cute idea. Not necessarily from places like eBay would be my recommendation. eBay used to be a place to go to get some used kit from a pilot who'd moved on to something else, and you could get your hands on it and you could wring the life out of it and get it for a much more reduced price. It's a business for many people now, so unfortunately when you search for those things, they're pretty expensive. There are places in the forums, there are places around the internet that I would suggest you go to buy kit, not use eBay, particularly for the second-hand stuff. You can get some really nice goggles, things like those Eachine goggles, things like the Fat Sharks, where they will work incredibly well for you, and so long as they've been taken care of a little bit, they'll give you many years of loyal service. And for a little bit more money than something like the EV100s, you might be able to get your hands on a set of goggles that's going to get you into the hobby and have a lot of fun. So I definitely would consider that for goggles. The other option that I would recommend is there are also freestanding screens. Not as immersive as flying with a goggle. However, you can get over the issues that some pilots have, myself included, in the early days with things like motion sickness and dizziness. And also with a screen, It can be something that you have all that situational awareness with as well. All-in-one screens can be relatively cheap. They're a lot more cost-effective than going for goggles in the first place. So that's looking at the goggles. Let's look at the cameras and VTXs. We'll do cameras first. So cameras, by far and away, the two most popular are the Cadix Rattle 2 and the Foxeer Razor, all the different variations of that. Also, the Cadix Ant got a lot of votes. Personally, I'm not a fan of the Ant. I think it's a bit of a potato camera in terms of the image quality. Unless they've changed it recently, I'm always a little bit when an Ant comes on a review unit, but it is cheap and cheerful. And here on the right-hand side, you can see the approximate prices. Even for the really, really nice cameras, things like the Foxeer Predator, things like the Foxeer Toothless, things like the Runcam Eagle 3, you're not going to be paying more than about £30 for them, $30. And it pays to get the best camera that you can get your hands on. Some of the smaller ones are less quality, and these days there aren't a lot of real duffers hanging around in camera land. So if you go for the top 4 or 5 in here, so the Rattle 2, the Razor, things like the Phoenix 2, the Toothless, and I would put the Predator in there as well, and also the Eagle 3, they're all really good choices. But again, buying second hand can be useful too, although cameras do tend to be in a place where they tend to get quite a bit of abuse, so make sure it's the picture of the actual item that they're selling and you get a nice close-up look to make sure that the lens hasn't been destroyed. Last list of recommendations are for VTXs. Now, I personally fly a lot of TBS stuff here and I really rely on it. The Holy Bro stuff has been quite good as well, and I also quite like the Speedy Bee stuff. Looking at what you recommended, surprise, surprise, the Rush Tank had the most votes. The Rush Tank is something that a lot of my friends fly and works incredibly well. They are really strong, robust units and they work fab. The AKK FX2 and 3 I've used here and I also like. That got almost as many votes and is about the same price. And then I would, if I was building a really nice model, I would go for something like the TBS Unify Pro. If you also fly things like Crossfire, then that integrates really nicely with the Crossfire system and the other things with things like the TBS Cloud. Speedy Bee TX500 and the Race Day Quads Mach 3 get pretty good votes. I also like the HGLRC Zeus 800 milliwatt here as well. So you can see again, there aren't any of these that's going to cost you really ridiculous money. The premium product I would say here in the list of recommendations is that TBS Unify Pro, but not surprisingly, the Rush Tank got the majority of votes. So hopefully that was interesting for those of you that were interested in getting FPV. Getting into FPV with those nice goggles, let's say they're £350, £400, and with a £30 VTX and a £30 camera, then you're starting to get close to what it would cost you for a HD system. I think now, if I was personally starting, I would probably go straight into the Walk Snail ecosystem. But the challenge is for many pilots, how do you know you're going to like FPV? How do you know you're going to fall in love with it and want to fly with it all the time? You don't really want to be spending £500–600 to try it and then realize, you know what, I don't really like it that much. So hopefully that's helpful for those of you out there who want to try FPV and try the analog stuff first, give you some more considered choices. Again, these aren't my choices here. These are from the community. These are from pilots like you who trust and rely on this stuff. This might end up being something that I do on a regular annual basis. So thank you again to every single one of you that answered. It was an interesting thing to look at what people are using for analog FPV and what they're trusting their models to. Thank you for spending your time today watching that video. You can find me in all the usual places on social media, and if you're trying to learn about a subject, then check out the playlist. All of my videos are organized into easy to follow playlists that if you're trying to learn a topic will take you from the basics right the way through to some pretty advanced stuff.